scalped half dead by raiders, only one in the wagon. A cowboy stitched her back and gave her her hair. The needle was a saddler's needle, curved, heavy, made for leather. I boiled it in the tin cup I used for coffee, dried it on the cleanest part of my shirt, which wasn't very clean, and then I sat there a full minute with it in my fingers, just looking at what I had to do. She was face down on my bedroll. Still. Not unconscious, I'd learned that much. Unconscious people don't grip the blanket the way she was gripping it, both fists white-knuckled in the wool. She was awake and she was holding herself together by will alone, and I figured the least I could do was try to match that. The thread was waxed linen. I had it for mending harness. I don't know if it was the right thing. I'd never stitched a person before. I said, "This is going to hurt." She didn't say anything, just tightened her grip on the blanket. I said, "You want a piece of leather to bite." "No," she said. It came out flat and dry, like she'd used up everything she had on something else. So I started. I'll back up because I got ahead of myself. That's how I remember most things. I start at the worst part and have to walk myself back to the beginning, which is what my father used to call a coward's way of telling a story. He wasn't wrong about much. My name is Cole Drum. I was 43 years old that autumn, which doesn't sound old until you've spent those 43 years the way I spent mine. In the saddle mostly, or digging or hauling or mending fence in January with your hands so cold you can't feel the wire. I had a line rider's wage, a line rider's shack on the east edge of the Beaumont spread, and the kind of face that people forgot the moment I turned away from them. That's not complaint, just fact. I was the sort of man who got a job done and didn't get asked to supper afterward. I'd ridden out that morning to check the southeast draw, where a section of fence had come down in the last blow. It was a gray day, the sky low and moving fast, and I had my collar up and my hat pulled, and I wasn't thinking about anything in particular, just the fence, the count I'd have to make, whether I'd get back before the rain came. That's the kind of thinking I did back then. Practical things, near-distance things. I smelled the smoke before I saw anything. Then I came over the low rise and pulled up. The wagon was off the trail maybe 40 yards, 2 of the 4 horses dead in the traces, 1 gone entirely. You could see the broken leather where it had torn free and run. The canvas was burned down to the hoops. Everything that had been on the outside of the wagon, the trunks tied to the running boards, the water barrel, a rocking chair somebody had lashed up top. All of it scattered and broken in a wide half-circle like something had exploded outward from the wagon itself. I didn't ride straight in. Old habit. I sat on the rise and looked at the ground, at the pattern of the tracks, and I counted horses, not less than 8 riders, maybe 10, coming from the north and leaving south. Hours old by now. A raiding party that had taken what it wanted and gone. I went in slow anyway. There were 3 people who hadn't made it. I won't say more than that. One of them was a man who died trying to reach a rifle he'd dropped, and his hand was still stretched toward it. I put his hand down flat and closed his fingers. I almost missed her. She was under the wagon, pulled in tight against the front axle, and at first glance she looked the same as the others. But when I crouched and looked close, I saw her back moving. Just the smallest rise and fall, barely anything at all. I got her out from under the wagon, and that's when I saw her head. I'd seen scalped men before, once or twice. It's not something you get ready for by having seen it once or twice. The back of her skull, from about an inch above the nape to just behind the crown, the hair was gone, the skin was gone, and what was left was a thing I'm not going to describe because I still see it when I close my eyes some nights, and I don't need to give it more words than it already has. She was breathing. I did what I could there, right where she lay. I had a clean bandana and I used it, and I packed the wound as careful as I knew how, and then I picked her up and got her over my horse. She didn't make a sound during any of it. I thought that might mean she was gone somewhere inside herself, past feeling. Later I'd find out she was present for every second of it. She just had nothing left to spend on sound. The line shack was 4 miles. It took nearly an hour because I walked the whole way, leading the horse, keeping my hand on her back to hold her steady. My shack had 1 room, 1 window, a wood stove, a table, 2 chairs, and the cot. I'd been on the Beaumont spread 6 years at that point, and I hadn't accumulated much beyond what I came with. A few books. A photograph of my sister in Ohio that I kept face down in the table drawer because looking at it made me feel something I didn't have words for. A rifle and 2 handguns, all clean. Enough food to last a man 2 weeks if he was careful. I put her on the cot, and I built the fire up and I went to work on her. Her name, I wouldn't learn it until the second day. That first night she didn't speak at all except once about an hour in, when she said, "Don't stop," in a voice that was almost nothing, just a breath with some shape to it. I'd been stitching for a while by then, and I'd stopped to rest my hands, and she must have thought I was finished or given up because she said it again. "Don't stop." Like stopping was the thing that would do her in. So I didn't stop. I stitched what I could and left what I couldn't, and I covered what I'd done with the cleanest cloth I could make. I boiled a strip of my second shirt and pressed it flat and laid it over her head and tied it under her chin. She looked like something out of a painting. A religious painting, maybe, the kind where people are always bandaged or kneeling in the dust. Then I sat in the chair next to the cot, and I watched her breathe. I didn't sleep that first night. I kept the fire. I changed the cloth twice when it went red. Sometime around 2 or 3 in the morning, she started shivering, and I put my blanket over her and then my coat too, and I sat there in my shirt sleeves watching the fire and listening to the wind work at the walls. I'm not a praying man, never have been. But I sat there that night and I bargained with whatever was listening. I said, "She's already had the worst of it. She's already paid more than anybody ought to pay. Let that be enough. Let that be where it stops." It's strange what you'll say out loud to an empty room when you're alone enough. Her name was Nora Voss. She told me that on the second day, when she'd woken up enough to be frightened. She came awake fast, the way people do who are used to danger, and she tried to sit up and couldn't, and she looked at me. I was at the table, eating, with eyes that had made some very fast calculations about how bad this might be. I said, "You're at a line shack on the Beaumont spread. My name's Cold Drum. I ride for Beaumont. I found you under your wagon 2 days ago." She looked at the ceiling, then at the window, then at me again. "The others," she said. "No," I said. I wasn't going to dress it up. She was quiet for a long time. The fire popped. Outside, the wind had eased and it was just still and gray. "My name is Nora Voss," she said finally. "I'm a schoolteacher. I was hired to teach in a settlement 40 miles west of here. My brother and his family were bringing me." She said it all level, like she was reading from a document. Like if she kept her voice level, the information would stay information and not become something else. I understood that. I'd done that myself with other things. "Are you in pain?" I said. "Yes. On a scale. 10, she said, then 9, 8. It comes and goes. I have laudanum. I've been keeping it for when you were awake enough to take it safely." "Later," she said, "tell me what you did first to my head." So I told her. All of it straight through, what I'd found and what I'd done and what the wound looked like and what I'd used and what I was afraid of. I figured she had a right to all of it. She was a grown woman who'd survived something most people don't, and treating her like she needed protecting from the facts would have been an insult. She listened to all of it without speaking. When I was done, she said, "You used a saddler's needle." "Yes. And harness thread. Waxed linen. It was the cleanest thing I had." She thought about that. "All right," she said. It wasn't forgiveness. There was nothing to forgive, but it was something. An acknowledgement, maybe, that I'd done what I had with what there was, and that was acceptable. "Now," she said, "the laudanum." The infection came on the 4th day. I'd expected it. Part of me was surprised it hadn't come sooner. The fever spiked in the afternoon, and by evening she was talking to people who weren't there, and I sat at the edge of the cot and put cold cloths on her forehead and the back of her neck and changed the dressing and talked to her. Not about anything in particular. I talked about the land mostly, what it looked like in different weather, the way the grass moved when a big wind came, where the creeks ran in spring. I don't know if she heard any of it. But silence felt wrong, and I didn't know what else to give. The fever broke sometime in the night. I know because I was holding her hand when it happened, not by plan, just that at some point my hand had found hers and I'd left it there. And I felt the sweat change, go cool and thin, and her breathing settled into something deeper. In the morning she looked at me and said, "Were you here all night?" "Yes." She looked at our hands. I'd let go at some point when she fell properly asleep, but my chair was still right up at the edge of the cot, close enough that my knee was nearly touching it. "You haven't slept," she said. "I slept a little." "You haven't," she said it like she knew. And she was right. I'd been awake for going on 36 hours by then, running on coffee and whatever sits underneath fear when you won't let it be fear. "I'll sleep now," I said. "You're through it." Cole, she said. It was the first time she'd used my name, and something about it, just hearing my name in her voice, landed somewhere in my chest and stayed. Go lie down. I'll wake you if I need anything. I went and lay on the floor with my saddle blanket, and I slept for 11 hours. She got better slowly. That's the only honest way to say it. There was no day where she suddenly turned a corner and was herself again. It was a degree at a time, a little more of her present each morning, a little more color, a little less pain showing in her face when she moved. I fed her. I kept the fire. I rode out each morning for the work I had to do and came back each afternoon, and the distance between leaving and coming back got longer in my head every day, the shack pulling at me the way water pulls at a drain. I want to say I was thinking about her as a duty, a responsibility, that I was doing what any man would do for an injured person in his care. Maybe some of that was true, but I'd taken care of sick animals before and sick men once or twice, and none of them had made the 4 miles home feel like they needed to go faster. We talked. That's what happened once she was well enough to sit up and past the worst of the pain. We talked in the evenings while the fire burned down, and I found out that she was the kind of woman who had read a great many books and thought hard about most of what she'd read. And she had opinions she didn't soften for company. And she was funny, drily, carefully funny, the kind of humor that comes out of watching people closely for a long time. She asked me questions. Nobody asked me questions. I mean, people asked me things, can you fix this fence, can you work this weekend, how many head in the east pasture, but she asked me what I thought about things, what I'd seen, what I wanted. And when I answered, she listened the way a person listens when the answer actually matters to them. I told her about being a young man on the trail, about the years before I settled to line writing, about the places I'd been and the ones I'd meant to go and hadn't, about my sister in Ohio, who I hadn't seen in 11 years but who I wrote to twice a year like clockwork, short plain letters about nothing much, because I could never figure out how to say the real things. Say them, she said. In a letters? To anyone, to her, to yourself even. She looked at me steadily. You're not a man who can't feel things, Cole. You're a man who thinks feeling things is a luxury you don't deserve. That landed like a stone in still water. I sat there and felt the rings go out. Maybe, I said. Not maybe. She said it gently, but she said it firm. You sat by a stranger's sickbed for 6 nights with a saddler's needle and harness thread because you thought she was worth it. That's not a man who can't feel. That's a man who needs somebody to see it. I didn't know what to do with that. I looked at the fire for a while. How old are you? I said. 31. That's young to have worked all that out. I had a school full of children, she said. Children who'd learned to make themselves small because they thought that's what they deserved. You learn to recognize the signs. 2 weeks in, on a morning when she felt strong enough to try standing, I helped her to the door and we stood on the step together and looked at the land. It was cold by then, the real cold setting in, and the grass had gone pale and the sky was a hard blue with no clouds anywhere. She put her hand up to her head. Careful the way she always was now, the way you're careful around something that has changed permanently. The cloth was gone. I'd been changing the dressing less often as the wound healed, and her head was covered by a wool cap I'd dug out of the bottom of my kit. She wore it pulled down careful. Tell me honestly, she said, what does it look like? The healing is good, I said, clean, no sign of trouble. That's not what I asked. I thought about how to say it. About 3 inches wide by 4 long, shaped roughly like a leaf. The skin at the edges has knitted up well. In the center it's different, smooth, like scar tissue. Will hair grow there? No, I said, probably not. She stood with that for a while. The wind moved through the grass, and the sound of it was the sound of the whole country, just that. Nothing else for miles. There's a woman in the town where I came from, she said. She lost her hair to a fever when she was 12. By the time I knew her, she was 50, and she wore her hair built up over wire frames. You couldn't tell unless you knew. She paused. I could do something like that. Yes, I said. It would require a looking glass. I'll get one. And a good deal of hair, more than I have left. She touched the edge of the cap again, just a brush of fingers. My hair used to be quite long. I know, I said. When I found you, before I touched anything else, I collected what I could, what they left. She went still, absolutely still. I'd put it in a clean cloth and folded it and set it on the shelf above the table and not mentioned it because I didn't know how to mention it, and I was afraid of what it might mean to her, that it was too much, or that it was too little, or that saving it had been a strange thing to do. "Cole," she said, "it's on the shelf inside. I didn't know if you'd want it, but I thought it should be your choice, whether you kept it or—" She turned and looked at me. I've been looked at in a lot of ways over the years. There's the look that means get this done, and the look that means you did that wrong, and the look that means I see you but I'm not interested, which is the one I'd gotten most. This was none of those. This was a woman standing on a step in the cold, looking at a man like she was seeing something she hadn't expected to find, and wasn't going to let go of now that she had. She put her hand on my arm, just laid it there on the outside of my coat and left it. "Thank you," she said. It was very quiet, plain. The two words weighted the way words get weighted when they're carrying more than they can hold. I put my hand over hers, and we stood there like that and looked at the grass. I rode to town 2 days later, a 40-mile round trip just there and back, because there was nothing in town I needed except a looking glass and some things for her wound and a length of good ribbon she hadn't asked for but I thought she'd use. I stopped at the dry goods, and the woman behind the counter looked at me the way people in town always looked at me. The line rider from the Beaumont spread, here twice a year maybe, not much to him. She started to go through the usual motions, the efficient courtesy of a woman who has other things to do. I told her what I needed. She stopped. "You said a looking glass and wound supplies. And a length of ribbon, good quality, dark red or brown." She looked at me differently then, not warm exactly but aware, like she'd revised something. "For a woman," she said. "Yes. Who's sick?" "Getting better." She got me everything I'd asked for, and she wrapped the ribbon separate from the rest, in a fold of brown paper, and tied it with a bit of string. She didn't say anything else, and neither did I, but when I went to pay, she gave me a price that was short of what I'd expected. On the ride back, I thought about what Nora had said, that I was a man who thought feeling things was a luxury I didn't deserve. I rode 40 miles of open country with that thought and looked at it from different angles, the way you look at a piece of ground you've been working without really seeing, what it looks like when you back up and see it whole. I'd been alone on this land for 6 years. Before that, years on the trail, years before that on my father's place, years further back that I didn't think about. And in all of it, I couldn't point to a day where someone had told me I was worth staying for. My father was a man who built things and fixed things and didn't talk, and I'd learned to be the same, and somewhere along the way I'd accepted that this was the whole of what I was. A man who could be used and then not thought about, a useful piece in other people's operations. Nora Voss, in a month of evenings, had looked at me like I was something else. It scared me more than most things I could name. She was sitting at the table when I got back, which was new. She'd been making herself get up more, testing how long she could be upright before the headache got bad. She had my one book, a battered copy of Parkman's Histories that I'd been carrying for years, open on the table, and she was reading with her chin in her hand like she had a long night ahead of her and didn't mind. She looked up when I came in, and her face did the thing I'd started watching for, the thing she maybe didn't know she was doing, a small settling, a loosening, like something in her had been waiting and now didn't have to anymore. I put the package on the table. She looked at it, at me. "I got the looking glass," I said, "and supplies and something else." She untied the string and opened the brown paper, picked up the ribbon, a dark reddish brown, the color of good cherry wood, held it between her fingers. She didn't say anything for a bit. "You didn't have to," she said. "I know. This is the right color." She was still looking at it. "My hair before it was very close to this. I thought it might be." She looked up at me then. Her eyes were clear and direct, and there was something in them that I'd learned to read over the past weeks, a kind of honesty she kept cocked and ready, that she'd point at you if you were going to be in her life at all. "Cole," she said, "what are you thinking about?" I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "That I'm going to have a hard time when you leave," I said. "That I've known that for about 10 days and I haven't known what to do with it." She was quiet, not the quiet of thinking what to say, the quiet of a person who already knows what they're going to say and is choosing the right moment for it. I wrote to the settlement, she said. Sent it with Jed Beaumont when he came to check on the shack last week. I told them I would not be coming. That circumstances had changed. I looked at her. I'm a practical woman, she said. Always have been. I look at a situation and I figure out what is, what I want and what I don't, what's worth staying for and what isn't. She set the ribbon down on the table between us. I'm sitting in your shack at the edge of winter with no wagon and no position and no family left. And I want you to understand this. I am not saying what I'm about to say out of any of that. I could find another position. I could go to my cousin in Denver. I have options. She held my gaze. But I don't want any of them as much as I want to stay here with you, if you'll have me. The fire popped. The wind moved outside. Nora, I said. You should know what you're getting, she said. I'm stubborn and I have opinions about most things and I'll want to teach. I'll want to build a school if there's any way to do it. I read constantly and I'll expect you to read too, eventually. I don't have patience for men who think a woman's worth is in her silence. I know that, I said. And she touched the cap just slightly, the reflex she probably didn't know she had. I'm not the woman who got on that wagon. No, I said, but she was worth saving and you're worth keeping. She looked at me for a long moment. That same look from the step, the one that saw something and wasn't going to let go. Then she reached across the table and took my hand, and I turned my hand over under hers and held on. We married in the spring. Beaumont let me buy the 20-acre parcel at the east edge of his land, the parcel with the shack on it, at a price that was more than fair. And I think he did it partly because he was a decent man, and partly because he'd never quite known what to do with me in 6 years, and was glad to have something to do now. We built on over that summer. A real house, not big, but with a room that Nora wanted as a schoolroom, with 2 windows facing east so the light came in good in the morning. She started teaching that fall 4 children at first, then 7, then 11 by the next year, word getting out to ranches and homesteads across 30 miles of country that there was a school that was worth the ride. I built her a writing desk for that room. Oak because she'd mentioned once that she liked the weight of oak, how solid it felt when you set your elbows on it. I built it over 3 weeks in the evenings, and when I brought it in and set it in place, she ran her hands along the top of it, and then she looked at me and she didn't say anything, but her eyes said it, and I thought, this is it. This is the whole of it, being seen. Her hair came back in the places where it could. She wore it long, built up over a small frame in the way she described that winter and threaded through it the dark red ribbon. She wore it like that most days, like she'd chosen it deliberately, which she had. I think about that sometimes, early mornings when I'm up first and the coffee's on, and I can hear her still asleep in the other room. I think about that woman who gripped a wool blanket with both fists and refused to go. About what it means that she's here, that she chose here, that every morning I get to be the man she chose. My father was a man who built things. I used to think I'd learned to be the same kind of man, useful for building, not much else. I know now that wasn't the whole lesson. The whole lesson is that some things you build stay standing for a long time, and some things you build, if you build them right, someone else will want to live inside. The sun's coming up. I can hear her moving now, the sound of her feet on the floor. The coffee's ready, and in a minute she'll come out and take the cup from my hand the way she does, and her hair will be loose around her shoulders, and she'll stand at the window and look at the land the way she's learned to look at it, like it's hers, because it is. There's nothing else I need to tell you. That's where it is.